But for the most part, the small person is amenable to reason and wishes to live pleasantly and happily. What happens then to make this increasingly difficult? Obviously, the first immediate experience of the child is in the home. If the home is discordant, if the relatives are at swords' points with each other, if the home contains a vast amount of complaint or one intensive complainer, this certainly works a serious hardship upon the child. Research indicates that under such circumstances, the child naturally and inevitably rises against discord. It is expressed through tears, sometimes by hysteria. It is also a reproachful attitude of the child toward those around it who are actually unpleasant. After a certain time, however, the child receives a series of disillusioning experiences. The child discovers that its effort to create peace is totally misunderstood. The contending persons may turn upon the child. They may punish the child for trying to arbitrate the difficulties of its parents. At the very best, the child is indoctrinated with the realization that these difficulties are inevitable, that the child growing up will face them also, and that there's no way of solving the problems except on some kind of an intellectual or emotional battlefield. By the time the child is fully indoctrinated with this concept, the character has already been damaged. It becomes adjusted to the inevitability of complaint, that the individual must complain his way through life. Also, it is witness to a gladiatorial combat of wills, in which there is a tremendous battle of one mind against another. Sometimes this battle is very obvious, sometimes subtle. In some cases it is a sudden and spontaneous outburst, and in other cases it is a long, lingering determination to injure, damage, or in some way work a retribution upon another person. Starting out with this environment, we can see why the average individual does not develop in early life those resources which would protect it against the emergence of destructive feelings and attitudes from within himself. The beginning, naturally, is in the beginning of life itself. But the average person who is concerned with these matters is no longer in childhood. They are in midstream somewhere in the course of life. And they are mostly concerned with the inevitable discomforts which return to themselves and which they are not able to assimilate constructively. Once the person starts a line of criticism or condemnation, the circumstances around them begin to be adversely affected. The individual against whom the attitude is directed retaliates, thus compounding a felony. Retaliation is also considered to be quite natural, quite normal, and almost inevitable. But it is only almost inevitable because the average individual is not developing the normal resources with which he has been endowed. It is inevitable for the person on the level of his own action to act differently from the way he reacts to circumstances. But it is always a privilege and an opportunity to rise to a better level by which these difficulties can be arbitrated successfully. So we have in all of this type of situation to consider with the greatest care how nature handles the matter. That's the first consideration. Nature is sometimes subtle, but usually rather obvious. Nature simply rewards the bad disposition with that type of circumstance to which it is properly entitled. In other words, it surrounds the individual with increasing difficulties arising from within the person himself, distributed through his environment and reacting back upon himself. It seems, therefore, that the dispositional factor is part of a vicious circle of consequences. If the person is constructive, well-intentioned, by nature kindly and thoughtful, he will gradually discover that this type of situation, this level of understanding, is in his environment as well as within himself. He stimulates good in others by using the good in himself. He stimulates discord in others when he stimulates the discord in himself. Nature has set this up as the last and final solution to all human problems, namely that the human being must grow or suffer. There is no excuse in nature. There is no real ability to prevent effects following their causes. And wherever an emotion is set in motion, the effect will be consistent with the emotion itself. A series of negative thoughts will not produce a positive end. A series of destructive attitudes will never lead to peace. A continual pressure of immaturity within the person will only accomplish maturity as a result of pain. All these things being true, nature sets the stage. Nature tells us what we can do and has given us great codes of law and revelation to guide us in this search for internal integrity. We have the Golden Rule. We have the Sermon on the Mount. We are told in all religions to not only love our friends, but to do good to those who despitefully use us. This last part is not so frequently quoted, because in many instances where the person claims to be devoutly religious, he never can quite get around to forgiving his enemy. If we go a little further into the matter, and we recognize that this is the way that nature works, then we begin to study the forms of punishment, which nature affects or inflicts upon those who disobey its rule. A bad disposition or lack of control nearly always becomes habit-forming. Very few individuals in the course of life have only one bad moment. These moments increase gradually as we permit them to dominate our attitudes. What it might be at first a brief hysteria or a sudden and dynamic conflict becomes a policy. Little by little, the whole mind not only nurses its grievances, but begins to look for more grievances. Not satisfied with the difficulties that it has, it goes out and discovers or invents further difficulties. By the time a person with a bad temper has indulged this for, say, 20, 30 years, it is no longer a person with a bad temper. It is a bad temper to which a person is appended. The temper becomes the important factor. It is the temper that becomes alive, and the person becomes only a servant of it.